Pokemon has introduced a total of 18 types across the games, with a new 19th type hopefully coming in the new Indigo Disc DLC. While not all types are created equal, type diversity is such a crucial part of every competitive team for VGC in order to combat a lot of your Pokemon's weaknesses. With this in mind, I'm going to break down the best Pokemon of every single type to use in VGC this generation. This list is only going to include Pokemon that are legal as of Regulation E, in order to have a better capture on the current metagame as of right now. I'm also, just to make this list a little bit more interesting, only going to include a Pokemon for one single type. So dual type Pokemon like Ludicolo, for example, can either be the best water type or grass type if I decided it deserved either, but it cannot be both even if it is technically the best in both types. With that out of the way, let's start off with our best normal type Pokemon. Starting off with the best normal type Pokemon, we have one of our many new Paldean Pokemon that's going to be on our list today, being none other than Farigiraf. I'm sure a lot of people might feel passionately that Blood Moon is the strongest normal type, and technically it's the strongest if we're talking about pure strength, but Farigiraf has a lot more going for it in PGC that sets it apart from both the Ursalunas. While the Ursalunas are both terrifying wall breakers for the normal typing, which is a very rare thing to see, they're also a bit hard to get positioned properly on a more consistent basis. With many teams having strategies built around completely stopping Trick Room, I think Farigiraf proves to be arguably the best way at managing anti-Trick Room methods, while also being a really good support Pokemon for your team overall. With its ability, Armor Tail, you can block all incoming priority from opponents, which means that you can not only stop really good offensive leads such as Chiampao and Dragonite, but you can also block incoming Taunt from a lot of Prankster Pokemon, with the main one being Tornadus. Because Taunt is typically ran on only Prankster Pokemon, this allows Farigiraf free reign in the tier as a strong Trick Room setter, as well as a great anti-Trick Room option with Imprison, and unlike most other valuable normal types, this isn't necessarily restricted to only being viable if it's next to a single Pokemon or two, as Farigiraf has significantly more versatility in partners than the Ursalunas, which need Cresselia or Dusclops to be good, or Maushold, which is really only seen with Annihilate. Going into our number one fire type, we're going to be discussing Chi-Yu. There's a lot of good fire types right now, and we'll see a lot more across the list today. But Chi-Yu has already been a premier threat across multiple different VGC formats, and I just had to mention it on today's list. This one arguably acts the most like a fire type, and you'll typically see it running a Choice Scarf or Choice Specs as a really good offensive option in Regulation E. But in previous formats, you'd also see items like Focus Sash, Life Orb, and Safety Goggles have great success. Chi-Yu in my eyes is the biggest reason why especially offensive viable like Fluttermane and Blood Moon can continue to keep up with power creep and be as much of an offensive nightmare as they prove to be in the current generation. Going to our grass type entry, this is going to be a little bit inflated, but I couldn't just rank one of these Pokemon without the other, so we're going to be including all 4 Ogerpons today. I do think this one is very team dependent, but Ogerpon as a whole is just so influential to the format, and I do think that the best one kind of does ebb and flow to a degree. Ogerpon's masks make it a truly terrifying option that can absolutely shatter most different teams, and despite being locked into a specific Terra type, it doesn't really matter because you'll still get a terrifying stat boost. While Hearthflame and Wellspring are typically the more consistent options, we did see Cornerstone and Teal Mask both have high success at other regionals, with the main one that both actually just recently did being Toronto. And I fully do expect that all 4 Ogerpon forms will continue to hold a lot of meta relevancy as we continue into future formats. We have one last starter typing, and if I was to get a pushback on any entry today, I'd assume it's going to be for our best water type Pokemon. I'm going to give this one to Iron Bundle, and while I'm of the belief that Iron Bundle's best sets don't actually run a water type move to begin with, it still is a great fast offensive option, and the water typing does help a lot here. With access to moves like Encore and Aurora Veil, you have great fast utility, and you have one of the fastest speed sets in the entire game with a 136, which paired with booster energy fires off faster icy winds than even Regieleki's Electro Webs would hit. Iron Bundle has established itself as arguably the best support Pokemon if you're not including any prankster priority options like Tornadus and Grimmsnarl, and this does prove to be valuable against teams with options like Psychic Terrain and priority blocking like Farigiraf. Iron Bundle has done really well at offensive roles as well, with the most noteworthy one being in Regulation C, where this proved to be a really strong Choice Specs user on snow teams, allowing for fast damaging blizzards and Hydro Pumps next to a Pokemon like a Abomasnow. I fully believe we've only just begun how potent Iron Bundle is going to be, and it's only going to continue to thrive in Generation 9, due to the fact that this typing actually does help a lot with handling most meta-relevant Pokemon, especially when you use Freeze Dry to handle any sort of water types that resist you. Going to our best electric type, this one clearly is not going to be a surprise, and this is arguably one of the best Pokemon we've seen added to the games for VGC since Incineroar. Iron Hands has probably been one of the most malleable Pokemon in VGC, and it's truly able to fit on any archetype. With options like Sword Dance being really potent on more offensive teams, meanwhile, you have the typical Assault Vest sets that are just splashable on offensive balance, or even just more defensive teams, you can make Iron Hands do whatever you need to in any given matchup. Despite the metagame having so many common intimidators, Iron Hands can partner with mons like Amoonguss to make the swords and sets really just sweep through teams easily. Chien-Pao can also just help with your more immediate damage output despite the Intimidate drop on lead, and even just Assault Vest sets will still be enough to damage most opponents and Revenge KO meta threats like Fluttermane without having to boost your damage at all, making this a really strong Pokemon, especially when we consider that Terra makes it so most opponents cannot kill you even if they dual target you. From one fighting type to another, our best fighting type entry is going to be our only other joint entry on the list, being both their Shifu forms. It's really hard to not rank both of these similarly, as despite the fact that Rapid Strike has significantly more meta relevance, I'd be lying if I said the Single Strike wasn't still nearly as broken, which might be a bit of a hot take, but let me explain. Urshifu Rapid is arguably one of, if not the best enablers for Tailwind teams in particular, as it's a really good partner for a lot of different checks to Tornadus, while still firing off really strong Surging Strikes that can be boosted by Tornadus' Rain Dance with Prankster. But on Trick Room teams, you actually do start to see a rise in Single Strike Urshifu being a strong option to handle a lot of different Terra Dragon Pokemon that would otherwise maybe check Torkoal, and even still, it's just a really good way to trade against common lead options, so Pokemon like Furgraf and Indeedee can just get up Trick Room easily. With the rise of Terra Dragon threats like Goldengo, I fully expect that Single Strike Urshifu will continue to rise in usage, but I don't necessarily think this is at the expense of Urshifu Rapid either. They're both just going to be really good Pokemon. One of the best types for finding a strong Trick Room setter is none other than the Psychic typing, and I think our best Psychic type is an option that can not only set Trick Room viably, but it also doesn't necessarily need to pigeonhole itself into this role, being Cresselia. Cresselia is a really good Pokemon, and I think it just goes to show that Generation 4 got this Pokemon right, as despite the fact that it did need a tiny bit of a stat boost in later generations, this proves to still keep up very confidently in the very heavily Dark type meta. With all of the new Treasures of Ruin, King Gambit, Roaring Moon, and many other noteworthy Dark types getting massive buffs, Cresselia is still able to combat them just by running really good defensive Terras like Fairy and Steel, to get rid of its otherwise somewhat lackluster Psychic typing. Cresselia is able to keep up with the format with a lot of really relevant support options like Trick Room and Helping Hand, though you can also run Icy Wind if you want to run this on more of a balanced team that doesn't necessarily mind losing the speed control. In recent generations, Dark typing has become a truly necessary typing on any strong team, ever since Incineroar's introduction, and Paldea gave us so many good options. This is truly the strongest generation that Dark types have ever had, and honestly, there's probably a good 10 or so that could arguably have this spot today, but I gotta give it to the main Dark type that is a really good example of why Dark is so good, being Chien-Pao. Most of my arguments for Chien-Pao boil down to the same points as Chiyu, where Chien-Pao can honestly just be seen as the physical equivalent of this Pokemon. You're able to enable the very physically heavy metagame and making sure that they can keep up with damage despite the fact that so many Pokemon are running Intimidate in the current format. Chien-Pao is probably the biggest reason that so many other Pokemon you might see on our list today end up even making this to begin with, because they just barely miss out on damage without having a Sword of Ruin boost. With an incredible offensive stab combination of Dark and Ice, as well as strong priority options for both with Sucker Punch and Ice Shard, and you even have a really strong Ice Stab that can remove one of the greatest counterplay options to Chien-Pao and its partner Pokemon, being Psychic Terrain, thanks to your stab move Ice Spinner. I overall think that Chien-Pao has just really done a good job at establishing itself in the metagame, and despite lowering its usage recently, I still don't see this Pokemon going anywhere from relevance. The Teal Mask gave us a lot of really strong noteworthy meta presences, but one of the more low-key strong options that this format gave us was none other than, in my opinion, the best Ghost-type Pokemon, being Sinistcha. Sinistcha is a strong Trick Room enabler thanks to its signature move Matcha Gotcha, and while it's yet to get a championship from specifically Sinistcha, I do think that overall Sinistcha can offer a lot more to a team than a Pokemon like Dusclops, which has seen multiple top 8 appearances. Dusclops definitely does have a bit of a problem due to the fact that if Dusclops is left alone on the field, it's a pretty free win in most cases because it can never actually win a game, it's just a good enabler. And Sinistcha, meanwhile, can not only enable games to almost the same degree Dusclops can, but it also actually puts up a really good offensive presence with the move Matcha Gotcha hitting both opponents at once and healing Sinistcha continuously. If you're not looking to click Matcha Gotcha on a given turn though, options like Rage Powder to sack off Sinistcha to keep a partner alive, or even Strength Sap to lower the presence of physical threats are both really good options, and Sinistcha can still set Trick Room to keep up at least with other really bulky Pokemon like Dusclops and Cresselia. Hospitality is also a nice benefit, and it does give Sinistcha a place on teams outside of just Trick Room, since you can heal up partner Pokemon, and typically this is used with setup threats like Como and Baxcalibur in order to make sure that they can keep a presence on the field longer than they otherwise would have. If I had to give a worst type on our list today, I think it's no longer the Ice typing, and instead it's going to be the Bug type. This type has no really strong options, but if I had to name one, there is one Pokemon that I think gets overlooked a lot in VGC, and it happens to be really good right now, being Volcarona. Now, I've actually went over Volcarona extensively on the channel in our most recent upload, but to summarize why Volcarona is really good here, it's a strong Quiver Dance bug type, which is already really good, and with a Fire Stab that can handle a lot of common bug type resistances, this proves to be a strong offensive threat. You're typically going to run Quiver Dance, Giga Drain, Heat Wave, and Protect on this Pokemon in the current format, with a Terra type of either Water, Grass, or Dragon that will all give you plenty of success. And overall, this also has great success with Rage Powder movesets, since Volcarona is one of the few Rage Powder Pokemon that can actually pressure any redirector in the game 1v1. Oh look, our poison entry is going to be another one of those strong redirectors, being none other than Amoonguss. For some reason, Amoonguss dropped off of most people's radars in early Regulation E for a lot of the newer grass type options, but this is still arguably one of the best support Pokemon, and it's the most consistent defensive Pokemon of all time in VGC. I'd compare how noteworthy Amoonguss is as just a support Pokemon on the defensive end in general to how most people think of Incineroar just as an intimidator. It's just the clear top Pokemon in the format. While we have a metagame that can actually afford multiple Amoonguss checks on any given team, Amoonguss still just finds a way to use Terra to its advantage, with many options like Water, Fire, Dark, Normal, Electric, and still so many more probably that I'm missing that have all been ran over the course of the generation to take on Pokemon that Amoonguss otherwise just wouldn't take on. Amoonguss was given the ultimate support move kit too, with options like Rage Powder, Spore, Pollen Puff, and Clear Smog all being viable. There are very few Pokemon with the rock typing that are actually viable in VGC, but for some reason this is the second generation in a row where the best rock type by a mile ends up being a fire rock type Pokemon that abuses the generation's new mechanic, and this time that happens to be Hisuian Arcanine. You'll typically find teams with Pokemon like Champao and Tornadus benefiting from Hisuian Arcanine due to the fact that Hisuian Arcanine can use Choice Banded Rock Slide with the Tailwind boost from Tornadus, or even just Terra Normal E-Speed to try and rail through most opponents thanks to Champao's Sword of Ruin ability. You will still find options like Terra Blast Fairy being ran, or even more defensive spreads with Terra Water and Grass to take advantage of Will-O-Wisp and your ability to Intimidate, but overall Hisuian Arcanine just happens to be a really good offensive piece. And also it's currently the only Pokemon in Regulation E with a 100% win rate at most events, though as of the time of writing this, I'm currently writing this before finals for LAIC, so this may change if Thiago ends up actually winning the whole tournament. When players think of competitive Pokemon, whether it's singles or doubles, your mind will immediately go to Landorus Therian, at least within the first couple of entries. While Landorus got significantly nerfed in singles, this managed to actually still hold its position as one of the best Pokemon in doubles. Landorus gained a viable new Flying Stab with the option of Terra Blast Flying, allowing you a newfound way to actually hit with your Flying type attacks that isn't just the move Fly, and deal insane damage to opponents, especially with the Terra boost. Landorus is typically being used as almost exclusively a Choice Scarf option right now, but in Regulation D, we also saw options like Swords Dance with Clear Amulet, or even more defensive spreads with Assault Vest and Rocky Helmet that took advantage of types like Terra Water in order to handle most checks. Right now though, if Landorus isn't running a Choice Scarf, that's a complete anomaly because the set is just easily one of the best Choice Scarfers in the current format, and Landorus still holds this place as one of the best Pokemon right now. While we're talking about the genies, if Amoonguss was typically considered the best defensive support Pokemon, Generation 9 probably has finally given the crown for the best offensive support to none other than Tornadus. Even when Whimsicott returns to the format, Tornadus gained a few key buffs that not only set it apart as the best flying type, but also is probably the best offensive support, starting with its new flying stab move, Bleakwind Storm. This move is 100 base power with 80% accuracy, but if you set the rain, which is typically good on a lot of Tornadus partners over the years, you'll find yourself having a perfectly accurate move that can hit both opponents with 100 base power at once, with a type that's very hard to switch around. This gives Tornadus a great way to punish both opponents at once, while still being able to afford other moves like Taunt, Tailwind, and one of your weathers either being Rain Dance or the newly given Sunny Day. Tornadus typically uses Terra Dark with Covert Cloak, but many new Terra types and items have been rising in usage lately, with the main Terra types being Terra Ghost or Flying, and the new items being used being Rocky Helmet, Mental Herb, Focus Sash, or a plethora of other more niche items. In previous generations, you'd have never considered a Hail team being viable, but with the new buff from Hail to Snow making ice types actually usable in VGC, Alolan Ninetales manages to establish itself as a true mainstay in VGC. With Alolan Ninetales, you get a strong support Pokemon that uses options like Terra, Water, and Ghost to handle offensive responses, while giving you a lot of the similar support moves to Iron Bundle, such as Icy Wind and Auroraville. While you're significantly slower than Iron Bundle, you do have the option to actually set your own Snow with the Snow Warning ability, allowing you to actually set your own Auroraville without relying on a partner spot. While you could make a case that the best Steel type is a Terra Pokemon, In this particular list, I'm not going to be counting Terra at all, so instead we're going to list one of the best steel types of all time, being none other than Heatran. Heatran has a lot of strong fire options like Magma Storm, Heat Wave, Burning Jealousy, and Overheat to name a few, that can punish most opposing steel types that would otherwise wall your steel stab. And besides Heatran, you can check most Pokemon comfortably in the format with just your stabs and Earth Power. Heatran, weirdly enough, continues to be one of the best checks to Heatran, and this has only gotten exponentially more true in the current format due to the addition of Terra. And with Terra Grass being Heatran's best Terra type, you can now change your 4x weakness to Ground to an actual resistance, meaning that Earth Power no longer beats you 1v1. Heatran's very splashable, and in my eyes, it only actually has competition from Goldengo for the best steel type. With 2 types left, let's start off with our best dragon type Pokemon. We've had a lot of strong contenders for this over the generation, with Pokemon like Dragonite, Como, and even Excalibur all being fairly strong meta presences. But the best dragon type in my eyes has finally proven to escape the mid allegations, with a few recent buffs in the Teal Mask DLC. So the best dragon type is going to go to none other than Roaring Mid. Roaring Moon proved to be a finally meta relevant Pokemon again with the addition of knockoff to its moveset from the recent DLC. Dragonite sets proved to be a lot more potent now, with options like knockoff and Terra Flying Acrobatics proven to be typically your stabs of choice due to the fact that it is very difficult to switch on Dark and Flying combination. You'll sometimes find more supportive movesets popping up with moves like Breaking Swipe and Tailwind, but that's not the reason that Roaring Moon proved to finally escape the mid allegations, since it's due to the fact that it's no longer weak offensively and running a really just lackluster Dark stab. I'm sure there were a handful of people that either rage commented or clicked off the video entirely when I didn't mention this as our best ghost type Pokemon, but the best fairy type Pokemon is going to be none other than Fluttermane. In my eyes, there's truly no other choice for the best fairy type, and if I had to pick a runner up, it would probably be either Clefairy or Hatterene if I had to go with a unique pick, or Alolan Ninetales if I changed my best ice type. But in my eyes, even the discrepancy from Alolan Ninetales to Fluttermane is so massive that I couldn't justify putting Fluttermane anywhere else, because it's truly day and night. Fluttermane proves to be one of the most viable special attackers in the history of the game, and that's mostly due to its very fast 135 speed, which paired with the boost energy can even outpace every relevant Pokemon besides Iron Bundle. Even without the boost energy, you tie a lot of really fast Pokemon like Chiampao, and this proves to be really good with your stabs of Fairy and Ghost, which are almost impossible to switch around. There's only 2 fully evolved Pokemon that actually can resist both typings, being Grafaiai and Pyroar, and I've yet to see Pyroar even enter someone's team builder in the past 10 years. Meanwhile, since Harvard Regionals, I've seen a disturbing lack of Grafaiai making day 2, so for now, Fluttermane's probably fine to keep its title here by just running stabs alone. Even if either Pokemon become relevant again though, you have plenty of viable coverage that Fluttermane can use for these final spots, with moves like Thunderbolt, Power Gem, Psyshock, and Mystical Fire all finding their way into choice specs viably. Overall, unless the Tapus return to the next DLC or we get a new Pokemon with a fairy typing, I can't really see Fluttermane actually losing its title here, and overall, it's going to be objectively the best fairy type in Paldea. So that's going to be my list today of the strongest Pokemon of every type. Let me know down below if you want to see me tackle an updated version of this when the Indigo disc drops, and while you're on the way to the comment section to let me know, make sure to leave a like, because if you've made it this far, you probably enjoyed the content, and consider subscribing for more weekly VGC discussion. Major shoutouts to Kurpie as well for editing this video. His link's gonna be down below, make sure to check out all of Kurpie's stuff, and I'll see you guys in our next upload. Until then, peace out guys.